Okay, well, welcome everyone to our 90-minute webinar today. I'm here with Dr. David Burns, and we'll be presenting to you on transforming therapeutic failure into success. And hopefully you'll have some fun and learn a lot today. Before we move forward, I am just going to drop something into the chat box for all of you, which is a version of our slides. So it's going to take me 1 second to just put that in for all of you. Okay, so you should have our slides as handouts now in the chat box. And I'm also going to, you might hear us refer throughout today to an upcoming workshop, and I'm going to put information in that in the chat box right now as well. Okay. So we're going to start right off today, actually trying to find out a little bit about you as a therapist, and also if you're a patient, we'll find out a little bit about how you use measurement, how your therapist uses measurement. I'll also just mention 2 quick things, which is that, sorry, I'm getting some people raising hands. So let me just tell you guys how this is going to work. If you have questions throughout the workshop today, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So if I look at the Q&A box, that's where you're going to answer your questions. Oh, people are telling me that the chat box is disabled. Okay, hold on, give me 1 second. Sorry to everyone, give me 1 second, and I'll open the chat box and I'll do that one more time. Just give me a moment and I'll have it all good for you guys. Okay. Okay, so thanks for the feedback. Hopefully you all can now see the handouts and also the information. I am going to disable the chat, just so you know, throughout the workshop, because that's not helpful for us.
Well, if you disable the chat, will they still be able to go into it and get the slides?
Yeah. Yep, just give me a minute. Yeah, so you all should be able to look in your chat box and see the slides, and then also see information about the workshop. And just so you know, I'll drop them in the chat again at the end as well.
And then after the workshop, if you like, we'll be sending you a link to the video, so you can be watching the video or showing it to colleagues or use it in any way you like.
Great. So I'll also just let you guys know, if you join late, I will be adding everything to the chat box again at the end of the workshop, so don't worry. Okay, so let's move on from that. And you can enter questions in the Q&A if you have questions. And we'll get to your questions later on. So I'm going to share a poll with you right now, and that's how we're going to get started. So let me get the first poll going. So the first question that we have for you, just in getting started today, is, do you use measurement in your therapy practice? So for those of you who are therapists, please answer our poll real quick. You don't use measurement at all. You occasionally use assessment instruments during sessions, and you consistently use measurement and with all of your patients at all of your sessions.
Yeah, and what we're talking about is session by session measurement with some kind of psychological instrument, measuring symptoms or the alliance or something like that. Do you not use measurement at all? Do you occasionally use measurement, or do you use assessment with all of your patients at every session?
Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results with you. So we can see, oh, go ahead, David.
Oh, this is cool. Yeah, only 26% of you use measurement consistently. 54% of you occasionally use assessment instruments, and 21% of you do not use assessment at all. And that's probably a big improvement from if we'd done this seminar 5 or 10 years ago, it probably would have been almost nobody using session-by-session assessment. So things are changing. And I think in the future, the things are going to be shifting more and more to more therapists using session-by-session assessments. But this is interesting information. Very cool.
And then we figured we would also ask, because for the general public that's here, as well as for many therapists who've been in therapy before, right? Many people are therapists and patients at the same time. So we have another poll for you. And that is, does your therapist use measurement? Or if you've been in therapy, did your therapist use measurement?
And we're talking about session-by-session measurement, not just something they do at the beginning or end of therapy, but on an ongoing basis. And this is for anyone who's currently a therapist, a patient, or has been a patient in the past. And even if you're a therapist, you may also be a patient. So now you can look at it from the patient perspective.
Okay, so I'm going to end this poll and I'm going to share the results.
Yeah, and this is really interesting. It's quite different from the therapist poll. And this is more what we've been thinking. 80% of you who are in or have been in the patient role, your therapist never uses session-by-session assessment. 14% occasionally use session-by-session assessment, and 6%, only 6% of you have therapists who consistently, who always use assessment at every session. Fantastic information. Thank you.
Absolutely. It also suggests that what we're going to be telling you about today might, be very helpful in changing the way that you practice or changing your expectations of your therapist going forward. So we're going to start our presentation today actually with a story of a kind of epic failure of mine. And then we're going to kind of help you to understand how we could improve therapeutic failure. So that's our goal for today, is to help you to learn how to transform your practice using measurement and responding to failures in measurement. So I had a patient that I was seeing many years ago who was about 50 years old, a 50-year-old married woman, and she was presenting with symptoms of panic disorder. And until this session, which was about 5 sessions into treatment, the measurement that I was using with her, measures of symptoms and measures of the therapeutic alliance, were showing a really strong therapeutic alliance. It seemed like the two of us were getting along well. She seemed to be appreciating therapy. There was a lot of warmth and a lot of empathy. And she was a patient who had had kind of a complicated history and had really wanted some time in therapy to talk and to get support as we were kind of getting set up and geared up for doing some cognitive and behavioral work with her panic disorder. So in this particular session, we were really kind of shifting gears from talking and getting support to kind of really starting to work on her negative thoughts, on her cognitive distortions. And we got to this thought on a daily mood log that she had that was, I will end up in a mental institution like my schizophrenic sister. And, this is the idea of having a fear of losing control or going crazy when one has panic disorder is a common thought. And so I listened and empathized a bit and also continued to move forward. She was a little bit tearful when she was kind of reading this thought to me, I'll end up in a mental institution like my schizophrenic sister, but she was very responsive to identifying distortions and using a bunch of different strategies to really help her to challenge and change her thoughts in the session. And so I thought at the end of the session and throughout the session that it was really a very productive and very helpful session to her. And that's what I would have thought and continued to think if I didn't have any kind of measures. But let's see what the measures revealed. So this is just a part of the measurement. We'll actually show you the full measurement scale that we use in a few slides. But on the empathy portion, where I was getting feedback about how the session went, it looks like the top of this scale would be 20 out of 20, right? That would be a perfect empathy score. And I got a 4 out of 20, which is, like I said, kind of an epic failure. She didn't think that I was warm. She didn't think that I was trustworthy. She didn't think that I was treating her with respect. She didn't think I did a good job of listening, or that I understood how she felt inside.
And can I comment on that one?
Yes, absolutely.
This scale is very sensitive and very accurate, and the lowest passing score is a 20, a perfect score, because even a 19 is a failing grade, because if the patient even marks you down in one category, like that you were warm or that you understood how they felt inside, they're telling you something that didn't click. The lowest conceivable score on this scale would be about a 10, would be like the worst therapist in the world. Or maybe if we had Putin counseling people, he'd probably get about a 10. And so a 4, and Jill is one of the most empathic and skillful therapists in the world. It's just staggeringly shocking. And it's like getting an electric shock as the therapist.
Thank you. We're getting a couple of questions about the handouts in the chat box. I will send them out again. Just so you know, the handouts are just a copy of the slides. So you don't necessarily need them right now, but I will make sure to get them to you in the chat box in a little bit. So here I am getting this feedback from this patient, which is pretty upsetting feedback, right? I'm realizing that I really missed the mark in terms of connecting with her. And then also we have a scale on helpfulness. And she also clearly did not find the therapy to be helpful, right? I'm sort of failing on many scores here. Didn't feel that we were working well together. Didn't feel that my approach made sense. And wasn't satisfied.
And the same thing here on interpretation. We'd be looking for a 20 on this scale, if you can show the scale just again. You know, a 19 on this one is not too bad, and you can talk to the patient about it. But you get down into a 15, the patient is very unhappy and really thinks you're not helping them much at all. And you get down into a 10, and it's horrible. And you get down to a 5 or below, it's the patient is really pretty irate with you.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and you're feeling also, by the way, as a therapist, sometimes you're feeling really, sad and kind of ashamed that you didn't help the patient in the session, and also probably a little ashamed at not realizing it during the session, right? I certainly felt that way. And then we ask these open-ended questions. What did you like the least about the session? What did you like the most about the session? And she said, what did she like the least about the session? That Jill paid no attention to my feelings about my sister's mental illness. That is a huge part of my history. And Jill didn't even stop to listen. She just pushed ahead trying to fix my anxiety symptoms without even caring. And what did you like the most about the session? Challenging my negative thoughts. But I couldn't even really engage in that part of therapy today because I was too angry and upset. So then I have a question for you, which is, do you think that my error was good or bad for the therapy? And obviously in the moment it felt pretty bad, right? And I can imagine some people might be thinking like, well, if Jill hadn't made a mistake, that'd be a better thing, right? Like, how could a mistake be a good thing? But I think what our goal is to show you today that any error that you make in therapy can be turned into a breakthrough, can actually improve therapy well beyond where it started, as long as you know about the mistake and as long as you work to respond to feedback with humility and kindness, warmth, and empathy. The idea that we want you all to know is that we all make errors, right? None of us are perfect for every patient. Our style might be wonderful for one patient and a little bit off-putting for another patient. So the question that you want to ask yourself is, since you all make errors, as I do and David does, do you want to know about it, right? Do you want to get feedback from your patients so you actually know that you're making errors so that you can actually turn things around? And to realize that we can actually, I'll show you in a moment, we can actually learn so much about the patient and about the kind of therapy that we need to do with this patient by pinpointing errors and by getting specific feedback. And so I'll kind of bring my story to closure by essentially saying the patient came to the next session. I went through the measures with her. I essentially said, my goodness, you know, it looks like I really messed up in the last session. You were trying to share with me something that felt deeply personal and intimate and upsetting and even kind of traumatic for you about your sister and her mental illness. And I didn't pick up on it all. And I just kind of rushed you ahead and pushed forward with the methods. And I can see that you were feeling, you know, hurt and misunderstood, and also very angry with me for not being a good listener, for not tuning in to what you were really experiencing in the session. And I feel really sad to have made that mistake with you and to have hurt you in that way. I really care about you. I've really enjoyed working with you. And I really want to try and understand better kind of what was going on for you in the session. And you know, I also said something like, and while this feels kind of awkward and hard and clunky, you know, I do feel kind of optimistic that talking about this will be an opportunity for the two of us to get even closer and do better work together. And can you tell me what you've been thinking and feeling about this? And she responded, you know, with lots of tears, but lots of warmth. And thank you so much for caring enough to ask me about this. And I do want to share this with you. And she was very appreciative and really, I think, extremely touched by kind of how responsive and open and humble and caring I was. And it was all totally authentic and there was no defensiveness in it. I just really wanted to understand more. And then I would just say in closing that really what I did learn about this patient was that part of her panic disorder was truly based on this trauma that she had had with seeing a sister with really major mental illness. And it was important to kind of slow down and talk much more about that. And I think she also really, you know, recognized just how sensitive she is to that and to people not understanding and not tuning in. And so we both learned, you know, a ton from this situation.
I've sometimes said that your worst therapeutic failure is your greatest success in disguise. If you'll only relax and absorb and grasp what happened. And what might have been going on in this case is one of the causes of panic disorder is excessive niceness on the part of the patient, or what I call the hidden emotion phenomenon. This might be an individual who tends not to express her feelings and to get angry with people, sweep it under the rug, and then it comes out as panic attacks. And so the fact that Jill was able to, that you were able to pick up on this and process it with her could have been an extraordinarily important part of the cure or the healing process as well. It's not just recovering from a rupture, but seeing the failure as the doorway to a much deeper and profound level of success and effectiveness with the patient.
So yeah, David, why don't you take it from here for a little bit?
Oh, sure. So here's how we deal with measurement and therapy. We use something called the brief mood survey that we ask patients to fill it out just before the session begins and right after the session is over. And these are brief, extremely reliable, extremely valid scales that measure depression severity, suicidal urges, anxiety severity, anger severity, happiness, relationship satisfaction, and sometimes other dimensions as well. And after the session, the patients also fill out something called the evaluation of therapy session, but you saw excerpts from that already. They rate you on empathy, they rate you on helpfulness, and other measures as well. Let's take a look at these instruments. This is the brief mood survey, and this is a one-page document. It can be used electronically or paper and pencil. And you can see this patient started out the depression with a score of 14. Now, that's important because if the therapist was guessing how the patient felt at the start of the session, your estimate would not be accurate because therapists' perceptions of how patients feel are not at all accurate, generally less than 10% accurate. I did a study in the Stanford inpatient unit, and experts in interviewing techniques had only 3% accuracy in detecting changes in depression in the patients they were speaking to. And this patient might have looked very chipper and happy on the outside, but a score of 14 indicates a very severe depression. You can see in the upper left corner, the 14 would be the worst imaginable depression, but a 14 is quite severe. Now, that's how the patient felt right at the beginning. You can see at the end of the session, the patient score was 3. So this showed a dramatic reduction. And again, on your own, you wouldn't be able to detect this or to estimate the end of session depression score at all accurately. So this, you can also use this to calculate your what's called recovery coefficient. And that's a measure of your effectiveness as a therapist. And you may and may not be willing to look at that. But this therapist got, as you can see, an 11-point reduction in one therapy session. And so 11/14 is 79%. So this therapist got a 79% reduction in depression in 1 hour, which would be a phenomenally successful and effective therapist. The suicidal urges were not present at the beginning or end of the session. That's a relief to know that. The anxiety went down by a similar amount, 11/15, similar to the depression reduction. And the anger reduction was 100%. And so this therapist can have a feeling of satisfaction that you've had a really mind-blowingly effective therapy session. In addition, the patient's positive feelings or happiness went from 9 out of 40, which was very poor, to 25 out of 40, which is almost a tripling of happiness, so like almost 300% increase in happiness. There's room for a little further improvement, both in depression and anxiety and happiness, but most of the work of therapy has been completed in a single session. Now, it's also, you can get all kinds of information from this. The relationship satisfaction patient was with her sister, started out at 16 on a 0 to 30 scale, so it's very poor. And there was no change in the relationship satisfaction. And this is very interesting from multiple perspectives. One thing, this proves that the causes of relationship problems have nothing to do with the causes of depression. It's a completely independent system, and depression is not a cause of problems in relationships. This patient had a massive reduction in depression, but there were no causal effects on relationship satisfaction. So you can get a tremendous amount of information from one brief mood survey with one patient. And I did a large study at the Feeling Good Institute, and we demonstrated that your reduction in sessions the first time you sit down with a patient will predict all the subsequent course of the therapy. It has a massive causal effect on changes right up to the end of treatment. So it's an extraordinarily important measure of that, your recovery coefficient. That's the measure of how good you are as a therapist. And this can also be heartbreak. I asked the people in our Tuesday training group at Stanford to bring in their brief mood surveys from the previous couple of weeks so I could see how people were doing. And one woman showed me a patient she was the most proud of treating. She'd been working with her for a year. And I saw her depression score a year ago and her depression score today, and they were exactly the same. And the patient was severely depressed, and there had been no improvement whatsoever in a year. And it can really hurt your feelings as a therapist when you see you're not being effective. But if you have humility and you're open to learning, then your patients can become by far the greatest teachers you've ever had, because they're going to show you exactly how effective you are at every minute of every day, if you're using this with every patient you see, you'll get constant information how effective you were in every single session. And then then this is the full evaluation of therapy session that the patient fills out at the end. And you can see here the empathy was 20. That's the minimum passing score. But this patient really felt cared about and understood. The helpfulness, again, was a perfect 20. The patient was totally satisfied with the session, was committed to doing homework, had no negative feelings during the session, and said that he or she was honest in filling out the scales. And then they can write down at the bottom what they liked and didn't like. So that's how the measurement system works. If we can go on to the next slide. And in spite of how transformative that can be for your clinical practice, and how fantastic it can be for you and for your patients, as we've seen in our survey, those of you who are patients, only 5% of you have therapists who are doing this, using this approach. And therapists have tons of reasons to resist measurement. First, the belief that the patient won't be honest. So they say, oh, you know, patients won't fill out these scales honestly. And often when you use instruments, you find out that most of your thinking is off, is incorrect. Theories you believe aren't actually valid, and your assessments of your patients will not be valid. And this belief that your patients won't be honest is not valid either. We do have a big problem with patient honesty. And the problem is really that your patients are going to be honest. And the real issue is, can you take it as a therapist? Do you have the courage to see what's really going on? Now, there's if the patient is coming voluntarily, you're going to be getting tremendously accurate data. And then the idea that therapists have is, oh, we don't need it. I'm really accurate. You know, I'm a sensitive, empathic therapist. And one of the things that you'll be shocked to discover when you use these instruments, if you use the ones we're recommending, when you use them for the first time, most therapists discover that you have failing scores on empathy and helpfulness from at least 50 to 75% of your patients. And most therapists find out they fail with every patient at every session. And so it's not the case that you don't need these instruments. In addition, as I say, I did a study in the Stanford inpatient unit. I had experts interview 178 newly admitted patients for up to 3 to 4 hours, and then guess how depressed the patient is, and the patient filled out how depressed they were feeling at that moment. How suicidal is the patient? How angry is the patient? How anxious is the patient? How does the patient feel about you, the interviewer, the therapist? How caring does the patient think you are? How helpful? And the results were shocking. You know, the accuracy on depression was only 3%. The accuracy on suicidal urges was 0%. The accuracy on anger was 0%. The accuracy on anxiety was like 5%. The accuracy on empathy was only 9%, and the accuracy on helpfulness was 0%. The therapists, top trained experts, their perceptions had almost nothing to do with how the patients actually feel. Another resistance is, and if you know how they feel, like you saw in the beautiful example with Jill, you can act on it. It still requires skill and training to learn how to interpret those results, how to respond to them compassionately. But you'll have a chance not only to transform the therapy, but to increase your skills dramatically. Therapists say, oh, it'll take too much time. Well, the total time required for this kind of testing is between 15 and 30 seconds per session, because the patients do all the fill it out before and after the session. All you have to do is look at it. You can instantly see exactly how you're doing in many dimensions.
And I'll make a couple extra comments on this slide.
Yeah.
So regarding the time, yeah. So if you're seeing patients in person, we leave a clipboard in the waiting room with measures on the clipboard, and the patient completes it before a session, and then they walk in and hand you the filled out instrument. This, you can think of as just like when you go to see your doctor and they take your temperature, right? They don't talk to you until they take your temperature and they take your blood pressure. It's exactly the same thing. And then after the session, we hand it back to the patient. And then in the waiting room after the session, they complete the after session form, including measures of symptoms and the therapeutic alliance, and they can leave it for us in, like a lockbox. David can also tell you at the end of the workshop today, there are electronic versions of all of these tools. We've all had to pivot to teletherapy and video therapy, and there are ways of sharing measures with patients electronically. If you use, some sort of EMR, you can actually have your electronic medical record system push these measures to your patients, and so have them, sent automatically. So that has to do with it takes too much time. And then I also just want to make a comment that we've been talking so much about sort of the bad news that you learn when you use measures, right? Which obviously is super important. And then you can turn that around into, true connection and transformation. But actually, there also are times where I'll have a session with a patient and I'm thinking at the end of the session that it was kind of a mediocre session. I can't maybe pinpoint it, but I'm thinking we spent too much time talking about this and I'm not sure that we got to the thing the patient wanted to work on or didn't completely get to our agenda. And then I see the patient's feedback, which was really, really high marks, right? That the patient thinks it was an excellent session, that we worked on just what the patient wanted to work on. And even that is useful information, which I talk to the patient about in the next session. It helps us to get aligned about what the patient really wants or what therapeutic style even I used in that session that was especially helpful. So you can really constantly be learning feedback that helps you to refine your approach with your patients.
Right. Somebody wrote that they can't see me. I can see me on my video, so I don't know why, and apologize for that. But I'm not that cute or anything, so listen to my voice because hopefully the words will be of value to you.
Yeah,
some value.
And you should be able to see just David and myself in the slides. This is a webinar. It's not, it's not a gallery view situation where you can see other people. Yeah. You should be able to see me and David. If lots of people are having problems, then let me know that. But I think I don't think that is a problem.
Other resistance.
Yeah, I'm getting enough chats that say I can see you both. So
oh yeah, good. Glad you can see me. Hi, everybody.
And if you are having trouble, it means you need to change the settings on your screen.
Sure. Now, another resistance from therapists is patients won't like it. I've found that patients love this if the scales are worded in a very user-friendly and polite way, and if you interpret them in a way that's helpful to patients, they love it. I've had only 3 or 4 patients. I've had over 40,000 hours of therapy with patients from all over the world with the most severe imaginable depression and anxiety, and only 3 or 4 ever refused initially to use the measures. They said it's too upsetting for them, or they don't like to be told what to do or whatever. All of them had borderline personality disorder. And I just told them, I apologize, but I can't treat you without the measures. That would be like going to an emergency room and saying that you won't take blood tests or x-ray or anything like that. I need this information to do a good job. But if you want to go to someone else, 99% of the therapists in our community don't use measurement, and I'm sure you'll find plenty that'll love to have you, but I hope you stay and work with me. All of them stayed, and once they began using the measures, they decided that they really liked them after all. Another source of resistance is people think that what you're doing is too mystical, too deep. You can't really measure trust. You can't really measure empathy. You can't really measure depression. But psychometrically, that's been proven to be false. Like the empathy measure that we use is 94% reliable. It's extraordinarily accurate and valid as well. Let's push on to the next thing. The big source of resistance is maybe you don't want to be criticized. Maybe you don't want to be accountable. I'm pretty narcissistic. One of my many flaws, maybe hopefully one of the worst, but I find it painful to be criticized. I feel ashamed. I feel disappointed. I feel shocked. But I find that when I find the truth in the patient's criticism, and Jill used the word humility, it 99% of the time draws us much closer. But I think, again, therapists don't want to be accountable. And I think, I mean, my wife is a clinical psychologist. She's the brains in our family. And she and I both talk about wanting to schmooze indefinitely with full fee patients, with, you know, you occasionally throw in some advice. And I think that's what therapy used to be, and you didn't have to be accountable. But personally, I like being accountable. I like seeing the measures because it gives me a yardstick to gauge my skill, my progress, and my growth. And then another thing, and this can take training, is I won't know how to respond to negative feedback from the patients. And we offer lots of trainings for therapists to show you exactly how you do that. We'll illustrate it in a few minutes with slides and with an actual role play. And then the benefits of symptom measures, it's really like having an emotional X-ray machine for the first time. I can't emphasize enough how powerful that is. The X-ray machine transformed emergency medicine. And this tool is going to transform the future of psychotherapy as well as medication treatment for patients with psychiatric problems. And the most important thing, you can track within session changes and see how effective you are. And there will be big surprises there. Sometimes you think you're effective and you screwed up terribly. Sometimes you think you screwed up terribly and it turns out you were extremely effective. You can also track in between session changes. What happens from the end of today's session to the beginning of next week's. And way back, probably 35 years ago, when I was teaching at University of Pennsylvania Medical School, I raised the question with residents, you know, we don't even know when patients change. Do they change within sessions or between sessions or both or neither? And now we have the answer, and you get the answer with every single patient, with every single session. You can see what happens to them within sessions, what happens to them between sessions. And it's fascinating data. Next slide. Another thing that's huge is it will identify suicidal thoughts for you. The patient will be filling out. We now have a 3-item suicide screener at the beginning and end of every single session. And so and you will forget, and you can't recognize suicidal patients. That's what the research has shown. But the scale will show you, and most of the time they'll be honest with you. And if suddenly they're having suicidal thoughts and suicidal urges, you can jump on that right away and prevent not only the death of a patient, but also prevent lawsuits. And then the most important thing is you can fine tune your treatment strategies, because if you're using treatment methods that aren't getting rapid and dramatic results, will change, learn new techniques, try other methods. I've developed more than 100 techniques to crush the negative thoughts that cause depression and anxiety. So I have a never-ending supply of fresh and different methods and strategies. So when something isn't working, I don't keep pounding on that thing over and over again. I say, let's try another angle until I find the one that breaks it open for the patient.
I also wanted to add a benefit of symptom measure. We talked about one thing is that patients may not like it. And I find quite the opposite, that patients like it, that they appreciate it. I think it's all in how you share it with your patients. And I just wanted to share with you all that when I first meet with patients, I let them know right off the bat that I use measurement, that it's a part of therapy, that it's an active ingredient in helping them to get better. And I can use that thermometer metaphor, just like if you went to the doctor and you weren't feeling well, they take your temperature, they take your blood pressure. How could they help you? And how would they know they were helping you unless they were taking measures? And that's the same thing. And I also let them know that the measure that we use after session, this therapeutic alliance measure, the evaluation of therapy session measure, kind of like a quality assurance measure, right? Like I care so much about you and you getting better that I want to know how you're doing at every session, and I want to know how I'm doing at every session so that I can pivot and course correct. And I think if I introduce it to patients in a way that I feel proud of it, right? I think it's kind of amazing that I use measurement, and I think it's like an amazing gift to the patients. Then I really don't find that patients have resistance to completing it. I think they appreciate it, and oftentimes you get that kind of feedback from patients as well.
Beautiful, well stated, Jill. And then in addition, if you use these measures, you're turning that scientist practitioner model into a practical reality. Everyone believes in that during graduate school. I'm going to be a scientist practitioner. That's fantastic, but nobody does it. Then you get into practice, you're not measuring, you're working on your own intuition, you join some cult, which is what a school of therapy is, and you keep doing what the cult leader says. This is probably sounding a little negative, and I apologize, but the positive is with measure, you are a scientist practitioner, and every session becomes a mini outcome study. Think about it. You're measuring exactly what happened in the session, and you can see what the effect was. And so you can move away from cult-driven or schools of therapy-driven field to a data-driven, science-based form of treatment. I am not a cognitive therapist. Some people say, oh, well, you put cognitive therapy on the map all over the world with your book, Feeling Good. Well, that's true, but I've never viewed myself as a this or a that. I'm just a human being trying to help people who are human beings who come to me, and I use a lot of cognitive techniques. I use techniques from a dozen different schools of therapy, and the only criterion of importance is this changing someone's life, and quickly and dramatically? That's what I want to do with every patient at every session, if possible. One last thing, if you go back to the previous slide,
Yep.
is, last night, our Golden State Warriors won the third game in a row against Denver. So they're doing great in the playoffs, but we have players who have fantastic ability to shoot the basketball, 3-point shots, some of the greatest players in history. Well, how did they become so great? Because they can see when the ball goes through the hoop. Ever since they're 5 years old or start playing with the basketball, they can see when it's working, when it's not working. And that's the only way you can improve. And so your clinical practice becomes like, your clinical work becomes like deliberate practice, because you see every session is like shooting the basketball, and you see, did it go through the whole hoop? And you cannot improve as a therapist. This is shocking but true. Without measurement, without data, you'll just keep doing the same thing until you're old, I guess. But you won't have the pleasure of developing improved or superior, or extraordinary, or world-class therapy skills. To do that, you must be using these kinds of assessments. It's impossible to improve without them. That would be just like going out on a basketball court and trying with the blinders on. So you can't see, and trying to improve your shooting. You can't improve because you don't know when it goes through the hoop.
It just so happens, David, and I think this is so funny, but last night after this webinar was all prepared and everything, I happened to have gone for a walk with a friend of mine who's a documentary producer. And she was saying to me, I just had this great meeting with this film editor. And, it's so funny. Basically, he contacted me and said, I loved working for you on this project, but I would really love, just a half hour of your time if you can give me some specific feedback on what you thought I did well, what you really liked about my work, and how I could improve. I'm just always trying to improve. She literally just told me that story last night, and I thought, oh, that is the funniest thing. Essentially what she's saying is, the person that I think is the most incredible on this team that I've been working with is the one who came to me and said, can you give me feedback? Like, this is the only way that I will learn my craft. And so we ended up having this whole conversation about basically feedback in kind of in all areas, right? In school and in sports and in careers and things like that. So it's this idea that if you're brave enough to ask for feedback, you can dramatically improve no matter what you're doing.
Beautifully stated. And then the benefits of the alliance measures is you'll find out for the first time how your patients really feel about you if you dare to look. And as I say, if you're using these measures for the first time, you have to prepare for the death of your ego, the great death of the self, because you may find that you're failing with almost every patient or every patient at every session, every day. And so you may find out that you're never doing anything even minimally adequate as a therapist. And that's huge. It's mind-blowing to see that. But we have all kinds of trainings available to transform, show you how to transform your therapeutic failures into breakthroughs. And therapeutic failure, in my opinion, is where most therapeutic transformation comes from. It's through that cauldron of failure that success emerges if you know how to deal with it.
And just so people know, we will share with you at the end some resources where you can go if you want to get a hold of David's measures, both paper and pencil measures and electronic measures. And I'll also drop in the chat an upcoming workshop that we have, and we'll tell you more about that at the end as well. If you'd like to see us really bring some of this to life, we're going to be doing a workshop in just a few weeks where we'll be doing live work with patients and really showing you how to use measurement and respond and do great therapy.
Yeah, that's going to be May 22nd, and we're going to actually treat 2 people live before your very eyes, people we don't know. So it's kind of like a high wire act without a net. And we'll be attempting to complete an entire course of psychotherapy in one session with each of them. It'll be an extended 2-hour session. We'll be using measurement and other new techniques. So we hope some of you will want to join and see how this works in real time with real people. But the benefits of the alliance measures is they're vastly more sensitive than human observation. And you can transform your patients into your greatest teachers. If you have the courage and you have the humility, amazing things can happen.
So this is probably needless to say, there's actually a lot of research in the field. I just chose one to throw up here in case people want to do a little more reading about it, but there's lots of research that supports the benefits of measurement. And this is a review article that talks about many studies that have been done where the only thing that was changed was the introduction of symptom measures at every session. Introducing symptom measures at every session will lead to a decrease in patient dropout, the therapist's ability to address symptom worsening, right? If you're not measuring symptoms, you don't actually know if your patients are getting worse, and then ultimately leading to better therapy outcomes. This is certainly clear in our work anecdotally, but it's nice to know that there's a lot of data out there that supports the use of measurement.
Now, just quickly, if your patients are coming voluntarily, you get absolutely stunning, accurate data from every patient at every session. Now, there are cases where patients fake good. If it's a child custody dispute, they are not going to fill out any scale accurately. Or if they're involuntarily hospitalized, they want to get out of the hospital so they can commit suicide or murder somebody or whatever, that they won't be, there's a high likelihood they're not going to answer scales accurately. Do patients ever fake bad?
Sorry. I was responding to something in the chat. Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah. And so let's say a patient has a lawsuit, they're suing somebody or they're seeking disability, then they're going to make themselves look worse than they really are. These are not problems with scales or instruments. These are issues involving the clinician's ethics and judgments. For example, if you're filling out disability papers on a patient that you're seeing clinically, that's an ethics violation because that's the dual role conflict. So, but you know, if you're seeing a patient voluntarily, then your data is going to be extremely accurate. Now we're going to show you a little bit, just a Whitman sampler, quick preview of how you might respond to negative feedback using a system I've created called the 5 Secrets of Effective Communication. And you won't learn this from our brief demonstration. A lot of practice is required, and willingness to learn and change is needed. But there are 5 techniques that we use.
Oops, sorry, I'm sorry. Okay. I just want to make a quick comment to people, which is I did disable the chat box very early. People did send a bunch of chats that got through initially when I was trying to share the slides with you all. But then I changed it so that the chats only go to myself and David, because a lot of people were saying the chats are very distracting. It was constantly rolling. So if you noticed that your chats are not going to everyone, no one's chats are going to everyone, all the chats are only going to me and David. I also ask that you don't put any questions in the chat box, that you save that you put all of your questions in the Q&A. So the chat box has been disabled. You won't be able to send chats to the group, only to David and myself, and we probably won't see them during the workshop, but you can send questions to the Q&A, and we will have time definitely within the 90 minutes to go and answer questions. So I'll open the Q&A and I'll read questions out loud, and David and I will answer your questions. Okay, so now we're going to talk to you a little bit about the 5 secrets of effective communication and how you can respond like warmly and empathically to your patients' criticisms and feedback.
Now there's 3 empathy techniques. I use the EAR acronym, talk with your ear, EAR. And the 3 empathy techniques are the disarming technique. And the disarming technique means you find truth in the patient's criticism. And it's based on the law of opposites. And that's if you defend yourself against a false criticism, you'll actually prove the criticism is valid, and the patient will attack you even more strongly. In contrast, if you genuinely agree with a criticism that's exaggerated, untrue, unfair, impossibly ridiculous, and if you genuinely agree with it and see that it really is true, the moment you agree with it, the patient won't believe it anymore, and you'll have a transformation of the therapeutic relationship. Thought and feeling empathy. Thought empathy is repeating the patient's words. Feeling empathy is acknowledging how the patient feels based on what the patient said. Inquiry is asking questions, gentle questions to learn more, to see if you got it right. The assertiveness skill is I feel statement, sharing how you, the therapist, feel. And then the respect tool is stroking, saying something positive and admiring about the patient, even in the heat of argument. Now, these aren't formulas. They're not used in this order almost ever. These are more like the keys on a musical instrument, like a piano. And learning to play a piano requires lots of commitment and time and practice. And the same is true with the 5 secrets. But we can demonstrate them to you right now. Let's say you have a patient, you look at the scores, and at the end of the session, your last session, there was no change in the depression or anxiety score, or the anger score, or the happiness score, and the patient is giving you a failing grade on empathy and helpfulness, and you ask about it, and the patient may say something like, well, tell you the truth, doctor, you're not helping me. My wife has been pointing that out, and I feel that way too. And then how would you respond? And you want to be the shrink here? And
Sure.
Jill?
Sure. Yeah, this is unscripted. We like to do these things kind of impromptu. So so David, go ahead and say it to me one more time. And
I already told you, you're not listening. You're doing it again. You're not helping me, and you don't listen to me. And I'll just talk about yourself all the time.
David, I think you're right. I really haven't been doing a good job of listening to you. And I can see on your scores and your forms that I really haven't been helping you, that our therapy really hasn't been bringing about significant change for you and the things that you want to be working on. And it sounds like I've really let you down. You're also saying that I've been kind of talking about myself, and that I haven't been doing a good job of tuning in and understanding you and listening to you. And I wouldn't be surprised if you're feeling, kind of hurt and insulted. And also it sounds like you're feeling pretty angry with me, and I don't blame you for that at all. I feel sad realizing that this has been going on. I really care about you. I'd really love to be able to do good work with you and to really help you with your depression. And I'm wondering if we could take a few minutes now to really try and have me try and really listen and understand. And would you be willing to tell me a little bit about how therapy's been feeling for you, how this has been, what you've been thinking and what you've been feeling?
Yeah, and then when we do this in our practice groups, then we give the therapist a grade and say, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. What grade would you give yourself on that?
I think I would give myself like an A minus. I felt like it was pretty good, but it didn't feel like it flowed great. It felt a little clunky.
I also gave it an A minus, although your A minus would be vastly beyond how 99.9% of therapists would be able to respond. It was actually very, very effective. But at the end, the only thing I would have said, because I mean, you disarmed me, you did feeling empathy, you did stroking, etc. I just say in the inquiry, I might have added a little positive reframing and urged the patient more strongly to go into the negatives. Instead of taking a few minutes, that's too nice, I think. But to say something like that, I'd really, it's painful to hear these things because they're true. And while I'm feeling kind of sad and disappointed because, I think the world of you, and it's just shocking to see how I'm screwing up, at the same time, this can transform our work together. This is the very conversation we need to have to get on the same page to do the kind of work you want, the kind of work that I want. So with that in mind, tell me more what this is been like for you, how I've screwed up, how angry and hurt you feel, and I'm ready and willing to listen. Does that add anything?
Totally. Yes. I think that's exactly what I was feeling. The ending, I sort of trailed off, and I think that was a much stronger inquiry and sort of warmer, more positive, more interested. Yeah. That was an A plus.
Yeah. Chris gave us an A plus too. Thank you, Chris, whoever you are. I like you, Chris. But that's how you do it. You can see even an expert like Jill. I mean, when you're under this kind of pressure, it's very easy not to do a terrific job. But if you practice and practice and practice, your skills can soar.
And the cool thing too, though, is that we always like to show the A plus response, but therapists should know that even a B response, right?
Yeah.
Even just some really good disarming, like you're right. I think that's really true. And I'm glad that you're bringing it up. I'm realizing I even like, I should have brought it up. I see it on the forums, whatever, anything that's sort of like warm and non-defensive is going to be a whole lot better, right? Than no measurement or no empathy.
Yeah.
So it's awesome to see the A plus, but if that feels kind of out of range, know that a B or a B plus is going to bring about really, I think, lots of connection between you and your patients as well.
And as a therapist, you have to do your personal work too, so you're not so threatened by the criticism, so that you can really use that as an opportunity to hit the ball out of the park. And just give you a quick.
Oh, I'm going to say one thing before you say that is just something that if therapists are thinking, wow, that does look really powerful. Like we said, there are a lot of opportunities to train and to learn with us. And I think David, in the last time that we did a David Burns Live, we even found that within the session itself, we kind of checked in with the patient on how we were doing with empathy. We got feedback from her and we had to course correct. So I just think something that's cool about kind of watching us do live work is you also get to watch us make mistakes and then correct mistakes, right? And kind of learn from our mistakes on the fly.
Absolutely. And just give you two quick vignettes. Jill and I are on the slave labor faculty at the Stanford Medical School. We're the volunteer faculty. And one of the things I did as part of my volunteer work was to establish a daily hour and a half group, cognitive therapy group for the inpatients. And then I used to go in once a week and lead the groups and teach the staff and see how the groups are going with this very severe population. And one day when I used the scales at the start and end of every group, obviously, and at the beginning of the group, there was a woman who had been just admitted, and she was very severe on depression, and she had some strong, suicidal thoughts and moderate suicidal urges. And what had happened, her husband had walked out on her, and she got fired at work at the same time. And so I ended up working with her in the group because she felt worthless, and many of the patients had similar negative thoughts. And I was convinced I'd really hit the ball out of the park with her. And I could just see that I had transformed her depression, reduced it, if not eliminated it completely, just there in the group. And so I was very excited to see her ratings at the end of the session. And as she was walking out, she handed me her end of session mood ratings and rated me on empathy. And I was shocked because she'd gone from severe depression to extreme, and from suicidal thoughts to definite suicidal immediate plans. And everything had gone to the worst rating possible. And on the empathy and helpfulness, she had all zeros. It's like I was worse than Hitler or something. And I stopped her. I said, Sarah, just stop for a second. We're using this data in a research study. And it's easy to get confused when you fill out the scales. On the depression one, the good ones are on the left. And on the empathy and helpfulness, the good ratings are on the right. Could you just maybe correct your answers there? And she took it and she looked at it and she says, doctor, I filled it out correctly. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, we just had a fantastic session. She says, well, good for you, maybe. Wasn't so good for me. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, when you said that I had a double whammy, and what I had meant was that she lost these two sources of self-esteem at the same time. But she said, when you said that, I thought you were making fun of me. And I said, oh my gosh, I feel devastated. I'm so sad that happened. And we talked it over and just took, 4 or 5 minutes and got back on track together. But if I hadn't been using the assessment instruments, I would have just thought, boy, what a wonderful session that was. And it was actually one of the worst sessions in terms of outcome that I've ever had. But yet that was an opportunity then to show humility and to connect with her. And then the next week I went back for my weekly thing, and there was a woman at the beginning who had just been admitted from the intensive care unit. She had made a nearly completed suicide attempt, and then they sent her over to the inpatient unit. And at the beginning, I could see that she had the highest possible scores on depression, anger, suicidal urges, anxiety. Everything was the worst imaginable. And when I went around to talk to the patients a little bit, she said she was an intravenous amphetamine addict, that she'd had 10 hospitalizations, multiple suicide attempts, and that apparently she had was in a rehab house to get over her methadone addiction and had she had flubbed up and used amphetamines, and they threatened to kick her out, and she attempted a serious suicide attempt to kind of get revenge. Really was one on the staff for threatening to kick her out of this house. And I asked her if she'd like some help, if she'd ever had any cognitive therapy, because she'd had all pill therapy. And she started cursing at me and said she'd heard about this effing stupid cognitive therapy, and I could stick it up my effing ass and shut the F up. And, I felt about 2 inches high. She's just ripping me to shreds. And so I looked away from her and I worked with the woman on the other edge of the group. It was a big circle, but I could just feel her pouring hatred in my direction during the entire group. And then at the end, I worked with another woman who felt worthless and suicidal. And at the end, I forced myself to look at the feedback of every patient, but I didn't want to look at hers because I knew it would be terrible. And I looked at it, and all of her scores had gone to 0. And then on the empathy and helpfulness, everything was perfect score. And then, what did you like the least about the session? She said she put nothing. And what did you like the best? She says, Dr. Burns, I want you to know that when you were working with that other woman, I felt like you were working with me. And I didn't even know before today what a cognitive distortion was. I just thought I was a worthless, horrible human being. And now I see it's my thoughts that create my feelings. And this is the first happy moment I've had in my entire life, Dr. Burns. God bless you, Dr. Burns. You changed my life and saved my life today. This is the greatest hour I've ever had. And I couldn't believe it. And if I hadn't gotten the feedback, I would have avoided her. I wouldn't want to look her in the eye if we meet in the hall in the inpatient unit, that type of thing. And so the message is that your perceptions, these are two extreme examples of something that's happening in lesser but significant degrees all the time, not only with our patients, with our families, with people in general. And if you want to get the information, then the assessment instruments can make a tremendous benefit. They can be a very powerful tool to transform your personal life and your clinical work as well.
I love your stories, David. They're always really touching and heartwarming and moving. And they just highlight that, even the best of therapists with amazing experience and amazing tools are not always aware of what's happening, or often not aware of what's actually happening for each of our patients. So we've mentioned a few times, and this is definitely not the end of our workshop. It's a 90-minute workshop, but before we move to Q&A, we've mentioned a few times that we have an upcoming workshop we'd love you to join us for. So we'll just tell you a little bit more about it. It's called David Burns Live, although David kindly likes to call it David and Jill Live. But I always think of David as the real star. Rapid recovery in real time. And the way this workshop will work is that we are going to have 2 volunteers from the audience that will get in touch with us ahead of time. And so we'll know a little bit of information about them. And we will do live therapy with them. So we'll start the day doing some didactic teaching. We'll talk to you about the whole team CBT model that includes testing and empathy that we've talked about today, and also addressing resistance and methods. So we'll teach you a little bit about the model and do an overview of it, and then we'll actually work with one patient. And then we'll process that work, and then we'll send you guys into breakout groups to practice a piece. We'll give you a chunk, we'll teach you something and have you practice it, and then we'll have a lunch break, and then we'll do the same thing in the afternoon. We'll do a full treatment with a patient, I think 2.5 hours therapy session, and then process, and then give you something to practice. So you'll get a little bit of everything: didactic, live treatment, and then an opportunity to practice. And we also have a lot of Feeling Good Institute volunteers that will help with practice groups. So you'll actually get some kind of expert feedback along the way as well. And it's on May 22nd. It's in 8 hours, 7 hours of teaching. So it's 7 CEs. And if you register by Monday, the 25th, you can get $15 off. So it's only $120 for that good deal. So
and they'll also get some certification credits toward level 1 team CBT, right?
Yeah, so I will say one more thing. It's not on the slide, but something that's really cool that we're doing for this workshop, we're kind of piloting this, is the workshop itself is 7 hours and 7 CEs, but we're actually, if you register, you'll automatically be enrolled if you'd like to join us for a pre-conference workshop. That's 2 weeks before, and it's all on the registration page. But and that'll give you 4 free CEs. And then if you do that whole thing, the 4 hours plus the 7 hours, you actually will automatically receive Team CBT Level 1 certification. So we're kind of throwing a whole lot in here to help make it really easy for people to get Level 1 certified and join our community and start to do trainings with us. So I will also, I'll add that to the chat box, but the place to, you just go to feelinggood.live. That's actually the web address, feelinggood.live. And then when you register, if you type in save 15, then you get the discount. And we'll put it in a follow-up email to you guys too. So I'll have one more reminder and then we'll move to Q&A. So this is just a reminder that the Q&A is not optional. It's actually part of the workshop. So we'll answer some questions now and the workshop is 90 minutes. So if you're wanting to get CEs at the end of the workshop, when I end the webinar, you will get a pop-up on your screen right there. Just wait a minute while Zoom ends, and then you'll get a pop-up on your screen with the CE survey. So you can complete the survey right away today. You'll also get a follow-up email that will include it if you didn't do it today, but you don't need to complete it twice. So you'll get your CE survey done today, and then by the end of next week, you'll get a certificate emailed to this email address, the one you registered with. That'll give you your continuing education certificate.
Can they use the hours for more advanced certification, like level 2? Yes. Or
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, yeah, absolutely. So if you're already level 1, then all the hours that you do with training post level 1 count toward level 2.
Definitely. Okay, well, let's move on to Q&A here.
Yeah, so I can actually stop sharing my screen, which will allow you to see David and me larger, I believe.
Hi.
And then I can open the Q&A, and that just got really big on my screen. Let me just make that a little smaller. And let me, I'll go to the top of the Q&A and I can read some questions to you, David. Let's see, there's lots of, okay, yeah, so David, maybe you can make a quick comment. They're asking about your measures. So are those available for therapists to use? Maybe you can make a quick comment here, and I can even follow up in the chat box about where they can find your measures.
Yeah, you just go to my website, feelinggood.com. I'm not associated with the Feeling Good Institute, although I think they rock and I support them tremendously, but it's just feelinggood.com. And then you go to the shop, and you'll see the psychotherapy ebook on sale, the therapist toolkit, the easy diagnostic system, things of that nature, along with a number of discounts. So that'd be the easiest way to do it.
And I just put that in the chat for you guys too. So feelinggood.com, and go to the shop to find the measures. Let me just see. Yeah, so someone asks, how does one use measurement consistently without it feeling mechanical? For example, do patients and clients sort of know how to answer to get a predicted outcome because they've done it so many times?
Well, I would just say that never happens if patients are coming in voluntarily. I've never had a patient say it seemed mechanical. I've never had a patient fake to get a desired outcome. The patients are honest, and the problem isn't the lack of honesty, but the presence of honesty, which is going to be shocking to you, the therapist. Also, there's a truth scale in the evaluation of therapy sessions. So if they're faking their answers, they'll tell you. You just look there and they'll indicate it that they weren't completely honest in the way they answered all the items. They say, which ones weren't you honest on? Which ones did you have trouble being honest on? They'll say, oh, the suicide item or this item. And then you say, well, thanks for telling me. How are you really feeling? But that's very rare. That's not a problem with the scales. That's just another illusion in the minds of a number of therapists. When I started using assessments, see, I've been doing assessments with every patient at every session since the late 1970s. I was probably the first person in the world to do it. And I used to think, I used to use the Beck Depression Inventory, which isn't very good, but it was all we had in those days, and it was better than nothing. And I used to think, man, I'm the expert. I know how my patients feel. And then I started looking at their Beck scores. I thought, my gosh, this thing is incredibly accurate. And my perceptions are not accurate at all. And then that's why I went ahead and then developed the instruments we have today.
Okay, well, I have a good question here. Well, this is a comment, actually. I'll respond to this one and then I'll ask you another question.
Great.
So someone commented, some of us ask, I think that means like ask about how we're doing without using a questionnaire. And there isn't really a question here, it's more like a comment, but I guess what
We'll illustrate the answer. Ask, how am I doing?
Exactly.
I'm your patient.
Wait, so you're my patient and I'm your therapist, and it's the end of the session and I say, yeah, I just wanted to know, how was that session for you? How am I doing?
Oh, fine.
Exactly. So the issue is that if you use a measure and the measure has 20 questions on it and it gets that warmth and empathy and helpfulness and homework and accountability, you will get way more information and it will be way more accurate, right, than the how am I doing question.
Yeah, the patients don't want to tell you to your face what I'm going to say. Oh, yes, doctor, you suck.
Right.
But they will tell you in the written written feedback. You're just fooling yourself if thinking you can do it without the instrument. You can't.
Right. Then someone asked, oh, I thought this was a good one for you. Can narcissists, like narcissistic patients, benefit from this therapy style?
I love narcissistic patients because I can identify with them because I'm very narcissistic myself. So I always have gotten along with them. Of course, I always use a lot of stroking. But the issue there is who's the boss, the patient or the therapist? I say the patient is the boss, and I've never had a narcissist who ask for help with their narcissism. They want help with their marriage or with some issue in their life. And so I let the patient set the agenda, and then I help them work toward that goal. But in team therapy, it's not like psychoanalysis or psychodynamic therapy where you have this idea of how people should be. My job is more like a plumber. If you have a broken toilet, you call me and I'll come to your house and fix it. But I don't go from door to door evangelizing for copper piping or anything of the nature. The patient has to be the one who asks for help. And the cause of all therapeutic failure pretty much is therapists who try to impose their values on the patient, or therapists who don't know how to find out what the patient wants or how to melt the patient's resistance to getting what they want.
Someone asked, when evaluating our empathy scores as therapists and not being satisfied until we hit 20, is that all or nothing thinking?
Yes, and we try to use all or nothing thinking because you see, we have the point of view that therapeutic failure is highly desirable. In fact, and so I want to make it as easy as for you to fail as possible. And that's why I say anything other than a perfect scale is a failing grade, because this will give you an opportunity to talk about something of tremendous importance with your patient that may be hard for them to talk about. But the fact they don't trust you, they don't feel the warmth from you the way they want, that they don't feel like you really understand their inner experience. The scale used to only go from 0 to 15, and 15 was all very true. My doctor was warm, very true. My doctor understands my feelings, very true. I said, well, I don't want therapists to get a perfect score so easily. I'm going to put completely true. So it makes it real easy to fail. So the goal here is failure, so you can transform your failures into home runs.
Great. There are some questions about the measures. So again, if you purchase the measures, you can absolutely use them in your practice. You just, you can purchase the toolkit, and it has tons of measures, not just this, but it has lots and lots of tools that you can use with your patients too. And someone asked, can I purchase the measures and use the tools even if I'm not Team CBT certified? And the answer is yes. Of course, we'd love you to get certified, only because then you'll be kind of on our list and we'll be in touch with you and you'll learn from the community. But yeah, absolutely, there's no requirement.
Yeah, these are tools for humans,
yeah.
and team CBT therapists do not exist anyway.
Right.
Just humans, and it's just a structure for how to do therapy. It's not even a new school of therapy.
Right. Let me just see. Oh, someone said, I'd like to hear again what David said about the reduction in symptoms in the first session, foretelling how effective you will be with that patient.
Well, ever since I've been a psychiatric resident, I've been involved in loving mathematical modeling. I used to do mathematical modeling of brain biochemistry, metabolic pathways. And then when I went into psychotherapy, now I do mathematical modeling of psychotherapy and how things change. And so I use something called structural equation modeling, which gets at cause and effect relationships. And I kindly got a database of 11,000 therapy sessions from the Feeling Good Institute. What I noticed is that there was a dramatic change in many patients the very first time they met with their therapists. And so I calculated that recovery coefficient. And of course, there was a whole range with some therapists getting these massive improvements the first time they met with a patient, others getting little, or the patients even felt worse after the first session. And then I attached that recovery coefficient in the mathematical models, and it had a massive predictive effect on changes from session to session and within every subsequent therapy session. That thing turned out to be the most important variable in all of psychotherapy, and it's never been reported before, as far as I know. But you can get your own recovery coefficient and work on improving it. I have a second database. I haven't had time to validate the first model yet, because I've got similar data from my Feeling Good app, where we're seeing amazing changes the very first time, the very first day people sit down with the app. And I'm hopeful that will have the same effect as well of predicting long-term changes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I was an undergrad at Penn, actually, which was a million years ago, Rob Derubis, who was my honors thesis advisor, one of his grad students was doing and did publish a study back then. I think it was called something like Sudden Gains in Cognitive Therapy for Depression. And it's not exactly the same thing, but essentially that paper showed that that what predicted that basically sudden gains within the first 4 sessions of therapy with patients. So patients who did have sudden gains in the first 4 sessions of therapy went on to have much better outcomes than those who didn't. So that it's that early sort of sudden change in cognitive therapy that predicted better outcomes later on, which is similar to, but not exactly the same thing as the recovery coefficient.
And every patient has that potential walking into your door for the first time. And some therapists have much better capacity to hook into that potential within the patient for rapid transformation. And,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, so that you see, just as physics transformed astronomy when it broke away from the Catholic Church, measurement is going to transform the field of psychotherapy, and we're going to break away from all current schools of therapy. We're going to just get rid of all of them.
I was just going to answer a question which was about the workshop. The workshop is available to both the general public and to therapists. We will break you into groups where therapists can practice with therapists and general public can practice with general public. However, if you are only if you are a licensed therapist can you become Team CBT certified, and also can you get a certificate of completion. So there's the CE survey is for the therapists, and so you can get a certificate if you're a therapist. I think that answers questions about the workshop. Let me see. Oh, there was one up here. Hold on, let me just find it. Oh, okay. So there are a couple of questions about, like, what if your patient doesn't respond, give you a real response? But let me read this. So what should you do if a patient won't tell you a real, sincere reason why they gave you a reduced score in the empathy section, even when you ask non-defensively from a stance of curiosity? Like, oftentimes anxious patients, you know, if you ask them about why they gave you these lower scores, they'll say, oh no, you didn't do anything wrong, even when I encourage their honesty and emphasize how much it'll help accelerate their recovery.
Well, we can both model a response to it. What I would say is if you did have some criticism of me, would that be easy for you to tell me or hard? And then that can open up a terrific dialogue in and of itself. All these things have to do with your skill, and you need to do a lot of practicing on how to respond to all of these different kinds of patient curveballs that they might send you, but you can turn them all into home runs if you practice and get the knack of it. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think especially if you have a sense that this is clinically relevant, right? That this is a patient who has a hard time being honest about their feelings, that isn't confrontational, right? That is conflict phobic. I think you can talk about this as a wonderful opportunity to give them a chance to try and share some really uncomfortable or difficult feelings. You can try to empathize with how hard it is to give honest feedback, right? But how important it is. And sort of, kind of use it as a therapeutic tool within session, even to try to practice giving honest feedback. David, I think you've sometimes said, if you were to criticize me, what might you say?
Yeah.
These kinds of exercises, if there were anything I were doing wrong, right? What could that possibly be? Let's do a thought experiment, right? So the idea is to not let it go, right? To not assume that they're giving you, subpar scores, but there's no reason for it, right? Of course, there's a reason for it. There's something going on. And yeah, so just, we have about 5 minutes left, just to let you know, David.
So maybe just do one more question, and then we
Yeah.
need to show the resources. And
Exactly. So we'll do one more question. Let me see if I can find one. Let's see.
we could go on for another hour on these cool questions.
It's true. Someone's asking for a German version of the brief mood survey. Let's see. I'm just trying to find anything else. Do you advise clients, we can answer this one, do you advise clients to fill out the questionnaire right before the session, or could they do it sometime during the day before the session? I understand this could be a quick tool for many clients to work through. Others may have more difficulty with it. There were a couple of questions, David, about timing, and I can just answer. I think the best thing, I love the idea of having, if you're doing it in person, I love the idea of having it in the waiting room. They fill it out right before the session. They fill it out right after the session. Again, if you're doing digitally, you can send it to them. They fill it out right before, right after. That's ideal, right? However, one question came up, like, what if the patient shows up and they didn't complete it? Well, there's an easy answer. They can sit in the therapy room with you and complete it, right? It will take them 2 minutes to complete it at the very beginning of the session.
Yeah, and I never let them get away with that. And I will say, or maybe if it takes you 5 minutes, I have phone calls to catch up on. I don't mind, but I hope next time you do it before the session, because I like to use the session time to help you, not to have you be filling out questionnaires. And if you do that, and they're really testing you to see, are you really committed to doing this? And if you stick to your guns, they'll suddenly start doing it before the session.
Let me see if I can go back to screen sharing. Hold on. Are you seeing the resources slide, David?
I do, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and the only other thing I was going to say, right, is that if you make sure that they do it during session rather than before session, and they don't like having to do it during session, of course, it motivates them to do it before session. Of course, if you have a patient who says the best time for me to do is an hour before session, right before I leave the office, but they do that diligently and they bring it to you, it really doesn't matter. It's
exactly, yeah,
the idea of them doing it regularly in whatever way makes it smooth and consistent.
You have to be flexible and use your common sense when as a therapist. There's resources on my website, feelinggood.com. You can find all of these scales and things in my shop. On my website, there are hundreds of hours of free resources for therapists and patients, training and self-help tools. There's a free depression class, there's a free anxiety class, there's a Feeling Good podcast. We just had our 5 millionth download 3 days ago. And also you can sign up for beta testing of the new Feeling Good app. Our preliminary findings are showing spectacular changes that are vastly beyond what human therapists can provide, or medications, antidepressant medications. In fact, we're seeing a 74% reduction in depression anxiety, anger, hopelessness, loneliness in a single day with the new Feeling Good app. And if you'd like to be a beta tester, it's free of charge. You just sign up at my website, feelinggood.com/app, and then we'll contact you. Right now, you have to have an iPhone. Eventually, we'll have it for Android and computer, but that's the only limitation right now. So we'd love to have you, use it and tell us what you think about it. We're incredibly excited.
So yeah, I just want to make sure we end on time. And so I guess I did show here you can also check out our website, feelinggoodinstitute.com, to learn about treatment, about more training opportunities, and about certification in Team CBT. And then we just want to end, remember that when I stop the webinar, you'll have an opportunity to do your CE survey right away. But we just want to end by reminding you of this awesome workshop that we have coming up. It will not be webinar style. It will be on Zoom, but we'll be able to see you and interact with you. You'll be able to raise your hand and ask and answer questions, volunteer for role plays. It'll be really fun and lively and interactive. So that's feelinggood.live with this code SAVE15. So we'll be in touch with you. You don't need to reach out to us for the slides or the CE survey or more info about the workshop. You'll get an email 24 hours from now with all the info that you need. So hopefully you can stick around and complete the CE survey. If you're a therapist, it'll pop up right now. But if not, you'll get it in an email tomorrow.
And we have a lot of fun there on Sundays. It'll be an all-day event, and I think you'll love it, and hopefully have fun and learn really cool things too.
Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you for being here, and we wanted to say thanks also to Maor Katz for making this free webinar possible for all of you. We hope to see you on the 22nd.